I found the envelope under my doormat 3 weeks before the annual HOA meeting, and the moment I opened it, I knew something was wrong. The voting proxy form looked official enough with the Sunset Ridge Community Association letterhead, but the signature line at the bottom had my name pre-filled in cursive, along with a checkbox already marked to give President Patricia Morrison complete voting authority on my behalf. I had never requested a proxy form, and I certainly hadn't signed anything. My name is Robert Xavier, and I had been living in Sunset Ridge, a planned community just outside Phoenix, Arizona, for 4 years. The neighborhood was one of those cookie-cutter subdivisions built in the early 2010s, with beige stucco houses, red tile roofs, and HOA rules about everything from mailbox colors to what kind of plants you could have in your front yard. I worked as an accountant for a mid-sized firm downtown, which meant I spent most of my days looking at numbers and spotting inconsistencies. That skill was about to become very useful. I tossed the envelope on my kitchen counter and made myself dinner, but the proxy form kept nagging at me. Why would Patricia send out pre-signed forms? It didn't make sense unless she was trying to collect votes ahead of time for some reason. I pulled out my laptop and logged into the community forum, scrolling through the recent posts. The annual meeting was scheduled for March 15th, and the main agenda item was voting on a special assessment to fund a new clubhouse renovation. The project carried a price tag of $3 million, which would cost each of the 212 homeowners roughly $14,000 in additional fees. The forum was full of angry residents complaining about the assessment. Most people thought the current clubhouse was fine and didn't need a multi-million-dollar renovation. Patricia had been pushing the project hard for months, claiming it would increase property values and make Sunset Ridge more competitive with newer developments in the area. From what I could see, she didn't have nearly enough support to get the 2/3 majority needed to pass the assessment. I grabbed my phone and called my neighbor Rachel, who lived 2 doors down. She answered on the 3rd ring, sounding distracted. "Robert, hey, what's up? Did you get a weird proxy form in the mail today?" "Oh yeah, that thing. I threw it away. Why would I give Patricia my vote? She wants to charge us 14 grand for a clubhouse nobody asked for. The form was pre-signed though. Did yours have your signature on it already?" There was a pause. "Wait, what? No, mine was blank. You're saying yours was already signed?" "Yeah, with my name in cursive." "I definitely didn't sign it. That's sketchy as hell. You should bring it up at the meeting." I told her I would and hung up, but my mind was already racing. If Patricia had sent me a pre-signed form, had she done the same to other residents? And if so, how many? I spent the next hour calling other neighbors, and the responses were mixed. Some people had received blank forms, some had received pre-signed forms like mine, and a few hadn't received anything at all. The pattern didn't make immediate sense until I cross-referenced the list with the forum posts. Every person who had publicly opposed the clubhouse renovation had received a pre-signed form. This wasn't just sketchy. This was fraud. The next morning, I drove to the community management office, a small building near the entrance of Sunset Ridge. Patricia's car, a white BMW X5 with a vanity plate that read HOA Boss, was already parked out front. I grabbed the envelope with the proxy form and headed inside. The receptionist, a young woman named Melissa, looked up from her computer and gave me a polite smile. "Good morning. Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I need to speak with Patricia about the proxy forms. She's in a meeting right now. Can I take a message?" "I'll wait." Melissa looked uncomfortable but gestured to the waiting area. I sat down in one of the rigid plastic chairs and pulled out my phone, using the time to document everything I had discovered so far. 20 minutes later, Patricia emerged from her office with another board member, Craig Henderson, who served as treasurer. They were both in their early 50s, dressed in business casual attire that screamed, "I take HOA business very seriously." Patricia's eyes narrowed when she saw me. "Robert, what brings you in today?" I stood up and held out the envelope. "I need to talk to you about this proxy form." Why was my signature pre-filled? Her expression didn't change, but I caught the briefest flicker of something, maybe annoyance, before she plastered on a professional smile. "Oh, that must have been an administrative error. Melissa handles all the mailings. Sometimes the system auto-fills information incorrectly." "The system auto-fills signatures in cursive." Craig shifted his weight, looking between us. "Robert, I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation." "I'm sure there is too, that's why I'm here." I kept my voice calm and level. "I talked to several other neighbors last night. Everyone who has publicly opposed the clubhouse renovation received a pre-signed form. That's not an administrative error. That's intentional." Patricia's smile tightened. "I think you're reading too much into this. If you have concerns, you're welcome to attend the annual meeting and vote in person. The proxy forms are simply a convenience for residents who can't attend. A convenience that gives you control over their votes without their consent. I resent that implication." Patricia's voice took on a sharp edge. "I have served this community faithfully for 6 years as president. Everything I do is in the best interest of Sunset Ridge. Then you won't mind if I bring this up during the meeting. You can bring up whatever you like. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." She turned on her heel and walked back into her office, closing the door firmly behind her. Craig gave me an apologetic look and followed her. I left the office feeling more certain than ever that something corrupt was happening. Back home, I started digging deeper into Patricia's background and the HOA's financial records, which were technically public information but buried in the community website under layers of PDFs. What I found over the next few days was alarming. The clubhouse renovation project had been proposed by a construction company called Desert Oasis Builders. A quick search revealed that the company's owner, Michael Morrison, shared the same last name as Patricia. More digging confirmed my suspicion. He was her brother. The $3 million contract would go directly to her family if the assessment passed. That was a massive conflict of interest, possibly illegal depending on how the HOA bylaws were written. I downloaded every financial document I could find and started building a spreadsheet. The numbers told a story of inflated costs and suspicious vendors. Desert Oasis Builders had quoted nearly double what comparable contractors charged for similar work. Patricia had never disclosed her relationship with the company, which violated the HOA's own ethics rules. But the proxy forms were the smoking gun. If she was forging signatures to guarantee votes, that was criminal fraud. I needed proof, though, and that meant I needed to see the actual proxy forms that had been submitted. I spent the next week quietly reaching out to every resident I could contact, asking whether they had submitted a proxy form, and if so, what it looked like. Out of 47 people I spoke to, 18 confirmed they had sent in legitimate proxies giving Patricia their vote because they couldn't attend the meeting. But 29 others swore they had never submitted anything. The math was troubling. If Patricia had collected those 29 proxy forms that were pre-signed without consent, plus the 18 legitimate ones, she would control 47 votes before the meeting even started. Combined with her own vote and likely support from Craig and the other board members, she could potentially swing the election in her favor. On March 10th, 5 days before the annual meeting, I was organizing my evidence when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a local number I didn't recognize. "Hello, is this Robert Xavier?" The voice was elderly, female, and uncertain. "Yes, who's calling? My name is Dorothy Williams. I live over on Sagaro Drive. Your number was given to me by Rachel Donovan. She said you were looking into some problems with the HOA. That's right. What can I help you with?" "Well, it's about my mother, Agnes. She passed away last November. I've been handling her estate, trying to sell her house here in Sunset Ridge. But yesterday, I received a notice from the HOA saying that Agnes had submitted a proxy vote for the annual meeting. That's impossible because she's been dead for 4 months. My blood ran cold. Do you still have the notice?" "Yes, I have it right here. Can you email it to me? And would you be willing to testify about this at the meeting?" Dorothy hesitated. "Testify? That sounds serious, Mrs. Williams. If the HOA president is using your mother's name to cast fraudulent votes, that's a crime. This goes way beyond HOA politics." "Oh my. Yes, of course I'll help. This is terrible." She gave me her email address, and within minutes, I had a scan of the proxy form submitted in Agnes Williams' name. The signature was a shaky cursive that might have looked legitimate to someone who didn't know Agnes had been dead for months. But Dorothy assured me it wasn't her mother's actual signature. This was the evidence I needed. Patricia hadn't just been collecting questionable proxy votes from living residents who hadn't consented. She had literally forged a vote using a dead woman's name. That elevated everything to a new level. I spent the weekend preparing a presentation for the annual meeting. I compiled all the evidence: the pre-signed proxy forms, the financial documents showing Patricia's conflict of interest with Desert Oasis Builders, testimonies from residents who hadn't authorized proxy votes, and the forged form using Agnes Williams' name. I also contacted a lawyer friend, Marcus Chen, who specialized in real estate law. He confirmed that what Patricia was doing could constitute fraud, forgery, and breach of fiduciary duty. "You need to be careful about how you present this," Marcus warned me over coffee on Sunday afternoon. "If you make accusations without solid proof, she could sue you for defamation. But if you stick to documented facts and let the evidence speak for itself, you'll be on solid ground. What about criminal charges? That's up to the district attorney. But if the HOA members vote to remove her and file a formal complaint, the police will have to investigate. Make sure you keep copies of everything." The days leading up to March 15th crawled by. I barely slept, running through different scenarios in my head. Patricia was smart and manipulative. She would try to shut me down the moment I started presenting evidence. I needed to be strategic about when and how I revealed what I knew. The evening of the annual meeting finally arrived. The clubhouse, ironically, was packed with residents, over 150 people crammed into the main hall. Patricia stood at the front with the other board members: Craig, the treasurer, Linda Baxter, the secretary, and 2 at-large members whose names I could never remember. The mood in the room was tense. Everyone knew the special assessment was the main topic, and emotions were running high on both sides. Patricia called the meeting to order at exactly 7 p.m., her voice amplified by a microphone. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending tonight. We have several important items on our agenda, but I know the clubhouse renovation is on everyone's mind, so let's address that first." She launched into a polished presentation about the benefits of the renovation, complete with architectural renderings and projected property value increases. The pitch was professional and persuasive. I had to give her that. She made it sound like $14,000 per household was a small price to pay for a state-of-the-art facility. When she finished, she opened the floor for questions. Hands shot up immediately, and for the next 30 minutes, residents grilled her about costs, necessity, and alternative options. Patricia deflected most concerns with practiced ease, always circling back to her talking points about property values and community pride. Finally, she said, "If there are no more questions, we'll move to the vote. As outlined in our bylaws, we need a 2/3 majority to approve the special assessment. All those in favor," I stood up. "Point of order." Patricia's head snapped toward me, her eyes cold. "Yes, Robert. Before we vote, I think the community needs to be aware of some serious irregularities regarding the proxy votes that have been submitted." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Patricia's jaw tightened. "The proxy votes have been properly collected and verified according to our procedures." "This is not the time, with all due respect. I have evidence that suggests otherwise. May I approach the board?" The room went silent. Patricia looked like she wanted to say no, but with 150 witnesses watching, she couldn't refuse without looking guilty. "Fine. Make it quick." I walked to the front, carrying my folder of documents. My hands were shaking slightly, but my voice stayed steady. "Over the past 3 weeks, I've been investigating complaints from multiple residents about proxy forms they received in the mail. These forms were pre-signed with their names without their consent." "That's absurd," Patricia interjected. "We sent out blank proxy forms to all residents. If someone signed your name without authorization, that's not the HOA's fault." "Except the forms came from the HOA office, with HOA letterhead, and were mailed by the HOA. I have copies here from multiple residents showing pre-filled signatures." I pulled out the examples and handed them to Craig, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. Patricia waved dismissively. "Even if that's true, it's a minor administrative error. It doesn't invalidate the properly submitted proxies." "Perhaps not, but this does." I pulled out the final document, the proxy form bearing Agnes Williams' name. This proxy vote was submitted in the name of Agnes Williams, a resident of Sagaro Drive. The problem is that Agnes Williams died on November 8th of last year. She's been deceased for over 4 months. Someone forged her signature and submitted a vote in her name. The room erupted. People started shouting questions, some directed at me, others at Patricia. Dorothy Williams stood up from her seat near the back, her hand raised. "I'm Agnes Williams' daughter," she called out, her voice shaking but determined. "What Robert is saying is true. My mother has been dead since November. I have the death certificate. She could not possibly have submitted a proxy vote." Patricia's face had gone pale, but she quickly recovered, her expression hardening into defensive anger. "This is a setup. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, Robert, but making false accusations against the board. I'm not making false accusations. I'm presenting documented evidence." I turned to address the room. "I've spoken with 47 residents about their proxy votes. 29 of them claim they never submitted proxies, yet forms bearing their names have been collected. Including Agnes Williams, that's 30 forged proxy votes. When you add in the 18 legitimate proxies, that's 47 total proxy votes that Patricia was planning to use to pass the special assessment." Craig stood up, looking shaken. "Patricia, is this true? Did you forge proxy votes?" "Of course not. This is ridiculous." "Robert has some personal vendetta against me. Then let's verify the proxies," I said. "Let's go through each one and contact the resident it supposedly came from. We can do it right now. If I'm wrong, I'll publicly apologize and drop the whole thing." Patricia's composure cracked. "We don't have time for this circus. The bylaws clearly state, the bylaws also state that all board members must act in good faith and in the best interest of the community," I interrupted. "They also require disclosure of conflicts of interest." You failed to mention that Desert Oasis Builders, the company that would receive the $3 million contract, is owned by your brother, Michael Morrison. Another wave of gasps and angry muttering. Patricia's face flushed red. That's privileged information. How dare you? It's public record. The company is registered with the Arizona Corporation Commission. Your relationship with the owner is a massive conflict of interest that should have been disclosed before this vote. Linda Baxter, the secretary, stood up suddenly. Wait, is that true? Patricia, is the contractor your brother? My family relationships are none of your business. They absolutely are when you're spending $3 million of community funds. Someone shouted from the audience. The meeting descended into chaos. People were yelling over each other, some demanding Patricia's resignation, others calling for the police. Craig tried to restore order, but nobody was listening. Patricia grabbed the microphone. Everyone calm down. This meeting is not going to be hijacked by baseless conspiracy theories. Robert Xavier has no proof. I have 47 testimonies, I said loudly, projecting my voice without the microphone. I have copies of forged proxy forms. I have financial documents showing your conflict of interest. And I have a dead woman's proxy vote with a forged signature. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's fraud. Patricia slammed the microphone down and stormed toward the back office. Craig looked lost, unsure whether to follow her or try to continue the meeting. I turned to the assembled residents. I think we need to pause the annual meeting and bring in legal counsel. What Patricia has done is potentially criminal. We need to contact the police and file a formal complaint. A man I recognized as Tom Brennan, one of the more vocal opponents of the renovation, pulled out his phone. I'm calling the police right now. Wait, Linda said, her voice uncertain. Shouldn't we talk to a lawyer first? We need both, I said. But the police should be notified immediately. This is fraud and forgery. Those are crimes, not just HOA policy violations. Over the next hour, everything unraveled. The police arrived, 2 officers who looked bewildered by the situation but took statements seriously once they understood the scope. Patricia refused to come out of the back office at first, but eventually emerged with her lawyer, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit who immediately started talking about due process and proper procedures. The police collected evidence, including the proxy forms and testimonies from residents. Dorothy Williams provided her mother's death certificate, which definitively proved that Agnes couldn't have signed anything. The officers couldn't make an immediate arrest, but they told us they would be opening an investigation and would be in contact with the district attorney's office. The annual meeting was officially suspended. Craig announced that a new meeting would be scheduled once the proxy vote situation was resolved, and in the meantime, the special assessment vote was postponed indefinitely. Patricia left with her lawyer, refusing to answer questions from angry residents who crowded around her car. I went home that night exhausted but relieved. The evidence was out there now. Whatever happened next was out of my hands. The following days were a whirlwind. The story spread through Sunset Ridge like wildfire, and soon local news outlets picked it up. HOA president accused of forging proxy votes ran as a headline in the Arizona Republic. Reporters called me constantly, but I declined most interviews, referring them to the police or to my lawyer, Marcus. The HOA board held an emergency meeting 3 days after the annual meeting. Patricia was placed on administrative leave while the investigation continued. Craig assumed temporary presidential duties, and his first act was to hire an independent auditor to review all of the HOA's financial records. What they found was worse than anyone expected. The auditor's report, released 2 weeks later, revealed that Patricia had been systematically funneling HOA funds to vendors owned by family members for years. The clubhouse renovation was just the most blatant example. She had also approved inflated contracts for landscaping, pool maintenance, and security services, all to companies with connections to her relatives. The total amount misappropriated was estimated at over $700,000. On April 12th, nearly a month after the disastrous annual meeting, Patricia Morrison was formally arrested and charged with fraud, forgery, embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty. The news footage showed her being led out of her house in handcuffs, her lawyer beside her promising to fight the charges. Craig told me later that she had broken down crying in the back of the police car, insisting that everything she did was to help the community. The legal process moved slowly, as these things always do. Patricia's trial was scheduled for September, but her lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal. The district attorney wasn't interested in being lenient. The case had garnered significant media attention, and prosecutors wanted to make an example of her to deter similar corruption in other HOAs across the state. While all that was happening, the HOA had to pick up the pieces. The board organized a special election to fill Patricia's position. Several residents threw their hats in the ring, including Tom Brennan and a retired lawyer named Sandra Hayes. The election was contentious but fair, with actual oversight this time. Sandra won by a comfortable margin, and her first priority was reforming the HOA's governance procedures to prevent future fraud. New rules were implemented. All contracts over $10,000 required competitive bidding from at least 3 vendors. Board members had to file annual disclosure forms listing any potential conflicts of interest. And proxy voting was eliminated entirely in favor of expanded early voting and absentee ballots with strict verification procedures. The changes were approved unanimously by the community. The clubhouse renovation project was permanently canceled. Instead, the board approved a much smaller upgrade using a reputable contractor with no connections to board members. The cost was $200,000, funded from existing reserves without any special assessment. The work was completed by July, and the renovated clubhouse looked great, certainly better than Patricia's extravagant plan would have. I stayed involved with the HOA after everything settled down, joining the finance committee to help ensure transparency in future decisions. Rachel nominated me to run for the board, but I declined. I had no interest in that level of responsibility. I was content to be a watchdog, someone who paid attention and asked uncomfortable questions when necessary. Patricia's trial finally took place in September, as scheduled. I attended most of the proceedings, partly out of civic duty and partly out of morbid curiosity. The prosecution presented a devastating case, walking the jury through years of financial malfeasance and culminating with the forged proxy votes. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, testimony from residents, and the smoking gun of Agnes Williams' forged signature. Patricia's defense tried to argue that she had believed she was acting in the community's best interest, that any financial irregularities were honest mistakes rather than criminal intent. The jury didn't buy it. After 3 days of deliberation, they returned guilty verdicts on all counts. The judge sentenced Patricia to 5 years in prison, though she would be eligible for parole after 3. She was also ordered to pay full restitution of $700,000 to the HOA, plus additional fines and legal costs. Her brother, Michael Morrison, faced separate charges for his role in the scheme and eventually pleaded guilty to lesser charges in exchange for testimony against Patricia. I ran into Dorothy Williams at the grocery store a few weeks after the sentencing. She thanked me again for exposing the fraud, saying it had given her closure to know that her mother's memory hadn't been exploited without consequence. Agnes would have been so angry, Dorothy said with a sad smile. She always hated the HOA, thought they had too much power and no accountability. I guess she was right. I'm sorry she became part of this, I said, but her case was what really made the difference. Without that proof of forgery, Patricia might have talked her way out of the other charges. Well, I'm glad some good came of it. The new board seems a lot better. She was right about that. Sandra Hayes ran the HOA with competence and transparency, publishing detailed monthly reports and holding regular town halls to get resident input. The atmosphere in Sunset Ridge changed dramatically. People started attending meetings again, actually engaging with the community rather than just complaining online. It turned out that when residents trusted their leadership, they were willing to participate. By December, nearly 9 months after the initial discovery of the forged proxies, things had settled into a new normal. The community had recovered from the scandal, property values hadn't tanked as some pessimists predicted, and the HOA was functioning better than it had in years. I even started to appreciate some of the stricter rules about lawn maintenance and exterior modifications, now that I understood they were being enforced fairly rather than selectively based on personal grudges. One evening in early December, I was out walking my dog when I ran into Craig Henderson. He had resigned from the board after the scandal, feeling guilty that he hadn't noticed Patricia's corruption sooner. We had talked a few times since then, but he still seemed to carry the weight of what had happened. "Robert, hey," he said, waving from his driveway. "Got a minute?" I walked over and my dog immediately tried to sniff Craig's shoes. "Sure, what's up?" I just wanted to apologize again. I should have seen what Patricia was doing. I was the treasurer. Those financial records passed through my hands. "Craig, we've been over this." She was good at hiding things, and she had been doing it for years before you joined the board. You can't blame yourself. Maybe. But I also didn't want to see it, you know. Patricia was so confident, so in control. It was easier to just trust her and not ask questions. He shook his head. "I learned my lesson. I'll never be that complacent again. That's all any of us can do, learn and do better next time." We talked for a few more minutes before I continued my walk. The neighborhood was decorated for Christmas, lights twinkling on houses and inflatable snowmen swaying in front yards. It looked peaceful and normal, exactly what a community should be. I thought about how close Patricia had come to getting away with it. If I hadn't noticed that pre-signed proxy form, if I hadn't started investigating, if Dorothy Williams hadn't called about her mother's vote, the fraud would have continued. Patricia would have passed the $3 million assessment, enriched her family, and maintained her iron grip on the HOA for years to come. But that wasn't what happened. Instead, a dead woman's forged signature had exposed everything. There was something poetic about that, I thought. Agnes Williams, who Dorothy said had always hated the HOA's overreach, had inadvertently brought down the most corrupt president in Sunset Ridge history. The spring annual meeting the following March was a stark contrast to the previous year. It was orderly, professional, and transparent. Sandra presented the budget, answered questions clearly, and put several important matters to a vote. Everything passed smoothly because the proposals were reasonable and the residents trusted the process. I voted in person, no proxy needed. As I marked my ballot, I thought about how much had changed in just a year. Patricia was serving her sentence at a women's prison in Goodyear, her reputation destroyed and her freedom taken. The HOA she had controlled so ruthlessly was thriving without her. And 47 forged proxy votes. including one belonging to a dead woman, had become a cautionary tale about corruption and the importance of oversight. After the meeting, several residents came up to thank me again for exposing the fraud. I appreciated the gratitude, but I reminded them that it was a community effort. Dorothy had provided the crucial evidence, dozens of residents had testified, and people like Tom Brennan and Rachel had helped spread the word and organize opposition. I just happened to be the person who noticed the first red flag. Still, Tom said, shaking my hand firmly, you're the one who had the guts to stand up at that meeting and call her out. That took courage. Maybe it did. At the time, I was just angry about the injustice of it all. But looking back, I could see how things might have gone very differently. Patricia could have shut me down, had me removed from the meeting, or threatened legal action to silence me. The fact that she didn't, that she tried to brazen it out instead, was her fatal mistake. Over the following months, I settled back into normal life. Work kept me busy, and the HOA drama faded into memory, something people occasionally brought up at neighborhood barbecues, but no longer the defining event of Sunset Ridge. Patricia's name became shorthand for everything the community didn't want to be. Secretive, self-serving, corrupt. In July, I received a letter from the district attorney's office. Patricia was appealing her conviction, claiming her trial had been unfair due to media coverage and prejudiced jurors. The DA wanted to know if I would be willing to testify again if the appeal resulted in a new trial. I wrote back saying yes, of course, though I hoped it wouldn't come to that. The appeal was ultimately denied. The judge ruled that Patricia had received a fair trial and that the evidence against her was overwhelming. She would serve her full sentence with no legal recourse left. Part of me felt sorry for her, seeing how completely she had destroyed her life. But then, I remembered the elderly residents on fixed incomes who had been terrified of the $14,000 assessment, and the way Patricia had callously forged a dead woman's signature to maintain power. My sympathy evaporated. By the time I hit the one-year anniversary of exposing the fraud, life in Sunset Ridge had fully moved on. The HOA was running smoothly under Sandra's leadership. Financial transparency was the norm, and community engagement was at an all-time high. The local newspaper even did a follow-up article about how the neighborhood had recovered from the scandal, using us as an example of good governance reform. I was interviewed for that article, and the reporter asked me if I had any advice for other HOA members who suspected corruption in their communities. Document everything, I said. Don't just complain online or gossip with neighbors. If you see something wrong, gather evidence, talk to people, and build a case. Then present it publicly where it can't be ignored. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. The reporter liked that quote and used it as the article's closing line. I got a few emails after the article published, people from other Arizona communities asking for advice about their own HOA problems. I helped where I could, sharing what I had learned about financial audits and governance procedures. One email stuck with me. It was from a woman in Scottsdale, whose HOA president was trying to push through an expensive landscaping contract with a vendor who happened to be his cousin. The situation was eerily similar to what had happened in Sunset Ridge. I walked her through the steps I had taken, documenting the conflict of interest, contacting other residents, gathering evidence, and presenting it publicly. 3 months later, she sent me an update. The contract had been canceled, the president had resigned, and the HOA was implementing new oversight rules. You probably saved our community tens of thousands of dollars, she wrote. Thank you for being willing to share your experience. Reading that email, I realized that the whole nightmare with Patricia had served a purpose beyond just Sunset Ridge. It had become a case study in what could go wrong with HOAs and how communities could fight back. The story of the 47 forged proxy votes, especially the one belonging to Agnes Williams, had resonated because it captured something fundamentally wrong. A powerful person exploiting the system for personal gain at the expense of everyone else. I thought about Agnes often, this woman I had never met but who had become central to the story. According to Dorothy, she had been a retired teacher, widowed young, who had lived in Sunset Ridge for 15 years. She had loved her garden and hated the HOA's restrictions on what plants she could grow. She had been kind to her neighbors but fierce in defending her property rights. When she died, she left behind a daughter, 3 grandchildren, and a house that was supposed to be sold to fund her grandchildren's college education. Instead, Patricia had tried to use Agnes's name one final time, to cast a vote the dead woman could never authorize. That act of disrespect, that violation of human dignity, was what ultimately brought Patricia down. There was justice in that. As the second annual meeting under Sandra's leadership approached, I found myself actually looking forward to it. The agenda included routine matters, budget approval, election of new board members, discussion of several minor community improvement projects. Nothing controversial, nothing dramatic, just normal, boring governance. It was exactly what Sunset Ridge needed. The meeting went smoothly as expected. Sandra efficiently worked through the agenda, pausing frequently to answer questions and ensure everyone understood what they were voting on. When it came time to approve the budget, it passed with 90% support. The election results were announced without controversy. The improvement projects generated some discussion, but nothing heated. I voted on everything, my ballot unmarked by proxy signatures or forged documents. Just my own choices, freely made and honestly counted. It was such a simple thing, really, the foundation of any democratic process. But after everything that had happened, I didn't take it for granted anymore. After the meeting, I walked home in the warm March evening, thinking about accountability and trust and the fragile systems that hold communities together. Patricia had broken that trust so thoroughly that it had taken a year of hard work to rebuild it. But it had been rebuilt, stronger than before, with safeguards in place to prevent the same thing from happening again. The street lights flickered on as darkness fell. My house sat quiet and welcoming, no suspicious envelopes under the doormat, no forged signatures waiting to ambush me. Just home, in a community that had survived its worst crisis and come out better for it. I unlocked my door and went inside, leaving the drama of HOA politics behind me. Tomorrow I would go back to work, review spreadsheets, prepare tax returns, live my normal life. But I knew that if another situation like Patricia's forgery scheme ever arose, I wouldn't hesitate to act. I had learned that lesson too well. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is pay attention. Notice the details that don't add up. Ask the uncomfortable questions. Refuse to look away when something is wrong just because confronting it would be difficult. 47 forged proxy votes. 1 dead woman's signature. And a community that refused to let corruption stand. That was the story of Sunset Ridge, and it was a story worth telling.